Hey there, and welcome to this video. So, quite a while ago, I got a comment under one of my other videos complimenting me on my ability to draw bodies and fluid gestures. And I had the plan for this specific video sit in my drafts ever since. So now that I finally feel equipped to actually address this topic, let's go. I think one very big factor for me is that I simply love dynamic art. I love drawing it, but before I even had the skill to do it myself, I loved looking at dynamic poses and flowy things like hair and fabrics, etc. And I think that led to me learning quite a bit subconsciously. So while I will analyze my own thought process while drawing, a big aspect of it all is just to get excited. Of course, you can't really influence your own passions, but one thing you can do is look at other people's art you like and get inspired. Some of my favorite artists that inspire me with their flow are Mochizuki, the mangaka of Pandora and the case study of Vanitas, Doukyuusei by Asumiko Nakamura, Kamitani Yuki's artworks, who, among others, is the mangaka of Hiraeth and Shimanami Tasogare. Also, the Art Nouveau movement in general, for example, the artists Alfons, Mucha, and especially the architect Antoni Gaudi. Just looking at their art makes me want to study how they inspire this passion in me, and I either stare at those pictures for ages or even do some studies myself. Also, I personally rarely use straight lines in my artworks in general. Using them more effectively is something I actually want to play around with, especially because in direct contrast with curves, they look very visually interesting and stylized. But for now, I just want my art to be, a lot of flowy lines and curves. So it's not exactly the most professional tip, I guess, but as a first step, it's more than fine. It's easier to exaggerate and then turn it down a bit than to exaggerate in smaller steps anyways. Another exercise that helps me with dynamic art is drawing random shapes or blobs with focusing on having dynamic shapes. You probably know this exercise already in context of creativity, but basically you or someone else draws random shapes in your sketchbook and you draw over it to turn those blobs into something else. For me personally, this works better with watercolors than markers, for example, because that way you have even less control over the shapes you're drawing. Or, the other person's drawing. With this exercise, you're forced to draw something out of the flowy brush strokes, which looks kind of funny most of the time, but it loosens up your brain and trains your creative muscle. Trust me. It's also a good idea to remember to sometimes put flow over accuracy, aka ignore bones and stuff for a second. Anatomy is important, but especially when you want to draw more stylized things, you have to start ignoring rules of realism at one point. And it's hard to find the balance, but for me, literally just playing around in my sketchbook with no goal other than having, nice flow helps me to get better at this. Other than that, I do studies of other people's art styles to figure out how they simplify things, and that way end up finding my own way of doing it. But that's once again too big of a topic to tackle in this video that's about dynamic poses rather than stylization. However, and I hate to say this, but learning the reals, aka studying anatomy, is a big factor in knowing how to break them. If you hate drawing realistic proportions, then you might just want to pick another aspect to study first, like playing with flow over accuracy, for example, because without actual interest on your part, you won't be able to learn anything anyways. But if you're at least a little bit curious about how understanding real-life bodies will help your own art skills, I'd suggest this is one of the first steps. I personally usually incorporate 10 to 20 minutes of rough figure drawing with websites like Stock in my warm-up routine if I want to improve my anatomy skills. That way, it's two birds with one stone because I warm up for my professional work and also improve my anatomy skills. If you want to take it a step further, you can also take actual real-life figure drawing classes because you're forced to draw quickly and not get too lost in unnecessary details. And oh my god, trust me, doing figure drawing is not my favorite pastime activity. It's impressive to look at what other people do with it, but doing it myself can be so frustrating because I feel like everything I do looks like trash, but also I have come to realize that teachers and other artists are right when they say figure drawing is one of the best ways to improve your anatomy skills. And also, posing and stylization and drawing quick. And there are so many areas figure drawing helps with, it's ridiculous. I think what helped me actually do figure drawing and learn something and, be open for it was to not think of it as drawing, because then I subconsciously want to make pretty things, but literally as a study session. Like how you'd sit down to study for biology class or a second language or something like that. And now I literally notice the influence a quote-unquote quick 20-minute session or a few real-life hours in university have on my actual art pieces right after I did them. Like, I'll be sitting there sketching, pause, and realize I just instinctively did something I would have struggled with a few days ago. It blows my mind every time. So yeah, coming from someone who has yet to properly enjoy traditional figure drawing, it helps. And you should do it, and so should I. So let's suffer together until we find the joy in it. And to all the people who actually do enjoy figure drawing, all the respect to you, I wish I was you. But back to the actual topic at hand. Another important aspect for dynamic posing is to consider the entire movement and not just the moment you're capturing, aka consider the line of action. You can start by asking yourself questions like, where's the wind coming from that blows the hair? Where is it going? Did the character just got their hand out of their pocket, or maybe from behind their back where they might have had a longer way to get to the specific pose they're in right now? How heavy is the necklace they're wearing, and how much would it swing in this particular movement? There are questions like this for every single element of your character, but remember to go from big to small. AKA, first you consider the entire body, then the limbs, then the hair and outfit as a whole, then the details. If you focus on the details too soon, the bigger movement get lost and it doesn't look dynamic, but rather like the hair or necklace or something like that is haunted. Unless that's what you're going for, then more power to you. I actually think learning animation helped me with this one, by the way, because now thinking of the next frame and the one before that is just a normal part of my thought process. Not that you need to become a full-fledged animator to get better at dynamic poses, but learning the principles of animation, especially things like follow-through and squish and stretch, is still a very good idea. Getting more into that in this video would, and I'm sorry to say it again, be too much, but you'll find a lot of resources on the 12 principles of animation online. If you do want me to talk more about, how doing animation helped me in particular with my illustrations or anything like it, just let me know. That brings us to my general process in action. First of all, I usually do warm-up sketches, like the quick figure drawing sessions I mentioned before, to get my hand and mind warmed up and loose. Don't skip this step, it helps a lot. Then, when I start the actual piece, I put down light, loose lines first, instead of going in straight with heavy ones. For traditional art, ink is a good way to work on getting more decisive lines, for example, but if you want to work on getting more dynamic poses, I'd suggest starting with a very light sketch. Personally, I like to use color erase pencils because they are pretty light to begin with. The fact that they are mostly erasable is an added bonus for me, even if I rarely do it, since I like to see my sketch shine through under the overall sketch. If I work digitally, I simply turn down the sketch layer's opacity before going over it on another layer with more decisive lines. For the overall pose, think about the direction you want your character to move in. Even if they are just standing around, there has to be some kind of movement. Maybe they just turned their head around to look at something, maybe they're stretching, maybe they're playing with their sleeves. Basically, something other than T-posing should be going on. What kind of pose it is depends on the character's personality and non-verbal communication style. For example, a very outgoing character would most likely have bigger movements, but even a very reserved one would have some kind of line of action. Maybe they're curl into themselves a little, but then the strings of their hoodie might swing a bit because of the movement, stuff like that. If I got trouble coming up with a pose or feel stuck, I just draw a nice, fun, flowy line and try to fit the body to the line of movement. This kind of explorative way usually works pretty well for me. The poses and designs for these characters in particular were actually done in my sketchbook first, which is why there isn't much exploration in this speed paint, and I start adding certain important details like belts or patterns earlier than I would if the designs didn't exist yet. But I still correct or try different things here as well, since you always have to double check if the pose and everything else are still working the way you want them to. Sometimes I do the exploration and tight sketch on the same layer, but most of the time I draw the details, aka the outfit, facial features, etc. on a separate layer to keep it cleaner. Basically, loose exploration on layer 1, tight/more detailed sketch on layer 2, final decisions on layer 3. Once I have the pose down and I'm satisfied with the overall movement, I like to take a quick break before I start adding the bigger details. The break can be like 5 minutes, an hour, or a day, mostly depending on my, real life schedule, but some kind of break is necessary to be able to double check everything with fresh eyes. After I took the break and I'm satisfied with the work so far, I draw the hair and other elements that are impacted by the movement, as well as things that aren't, but that are important for the overall design. Just because the main focus is the flow doesn't mean you should forget about other aspects of the process, like a balance in detail or overall readability of it all. If those things don't work, they can work against the visual flow, and then no curves or long hair can save you. So while thoughts like from big to small and from the focal point outwards are helpful rules, sometimes I break them for many different reasons. Sometimes I also introduce new elements to the character designs or illustrations specifically to accentuate the movement, which can make the entire character design look more interesting. For example, I like to use elements like long hair, sleeves, loose belts or chains, leaves getting blown around the character, and so on. Once I think I'm done with the sketch, I fill the character with a flat color to check the overall silhouette and edit elements if needed. And at the end of this particular lineup, I add a few more props to bring in more visual storytelling, after I made sure the base designs work the way I want them to. Drawing is an eternal loop of adding new lines and checking if the overall sketch still works before adding even more lines, checking it again, etc. And that should be it for now. I hope some of these tips helped you, and if you have any further questions or I didn't explain something well enough or whatever, please let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to help. I had a lot of fun making this video and analyzing my own thought process while drawing, so if you reached this point, thank you so much for being here and I hope you have a wonderful day. But for now, bye bye!